Captain Jake Morrison was enjoying his morning coffee when the ship's proximity alarm started screaming. The research vessel Wanderer had been conducting routine mineral surveys in the asteroid belt, when space itself seemed to tear open above them. Through the dimensional rift emerged the largest fleet of warships humanity had ever witnessed. "Well, that's not good," muttered Lieutenant Tommy Rodriguez from the navigation station, his voice barely audible over the blaring alarms. The main view screen displayed hundreds of sleek predatory vessels arranged in perfect formation, their dark hulls reflecting the distant sun like obsidian daggers. Chief Engineer Betty Walsh whistled low from her position at the engineering console. "Boss, my instruments are going crazy. Those ships are putting out energy readings that make our fusion reactor look like a birthday candle." Jake set down his coffee mug and straightened his worn uniform jacket. At 42, he had spent most of his adult life exploring the outer reaches of human space, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The lead vessel, easily 10 times the size of their small research ship, moved with predatory grace toward the Wanderer. "Communications, any word from Earth Command?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. They were 3 weeks away from the nearest human outpost, completely alone in the void. "Negative, Captain," replied Ensign Marcus Kim, the youngest member of their crew. His fingers danced across the communication array with nervous energy. "But I'm picking up transmissions from the alien fleet. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems. Jake looked around at his crew of 12, seeing his own mixture of fear and curiosity reflected in their faces. These weren't soldiers or diplomats. They were scientists, engineers, and explorers who had signed up to study rocks and map star systems, not make first contact with an alien empire. "Put it on speakers, Marcus," Jake ordered, settling into his captain's chair. The transmission that filled the bridge was unlike anything they had ever heard. The voice was artificial, enhanced to impossible levels of dramatic intensity, with reverb effects that would make a heavy metal concert jealous. It spoke perfect English, but with an otherworldly resonance that seemed designed to shake listeners to their core. "Primitive humans of the vessel Wanderer," the voice boomed, causing several crew members to wince. "We are the Zephyrian Empire, conquerors of 47 star systems and masters of countless worlds. Your species has been deemed suitable for integration into our glorious domain." Tommy snorted softly, quickly covering his mouth with his hand. The dramatic pause that followed was so perfectly timed that it felt rehearsed. "Prepare for immediate surrender. Resistance is not merely futile. It is laughably inadequate against our superior technology and military might. You have precisely 5 of your Earth minutes to comply with our demands." The transmission ended with what could only be described as an evil laugh, complete with echoing effects. The bridge remained silent for exactly 3 seconds before Tommy lost his composure entirely. "Did they just—" he gasped between fits of laughter. "Did they seriously just do the classic evil alien speech? Complete with the dramatic voice and everything?" Betty shook her head in amazement. "I've seen better intimidation in Saturday morning cartoons. Who wrote that script, a 12-year-old? Even Marcus, despite his nervousness, cracked a smile. "They actually said resistance is futile. That's like every alien invasion movie ever made." Jake fought to maintain his composure, but the corners of his mouth twitched upward. The whole situation felt surreal. Here they were, facing what was presumably humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, and it was playing out exactly like every cheesy science fiction film he had ever watched. "Captain," called out Dr. Priya Nakamura, the ship's xenobiologist, from her station near the back of the bridge. "I've been analyzing their transmission. The language patterns suggest they've been monitoring our broadcasts for some time. They know our entertainment media, which makes this even funnier," Tommy added, wiping tears from his eyes. "They studied our movies and decided that was the best way to intimidate us." Jake stood up and straightened his uniform again. Despite the absurdity of the situation, these were real aliens with real weapons pointed at his ship. But something about their over-the-top approach had lifted the paralyzing fear that should have gripped his crew. Instead of terror, there was an odd sense of familiarity, as if they were dealing with actors who had learned their roles from badly dubbed B-movies. "Marcus, open a channel to the lead ship," Jake ordered. "Channel open, Captain." Jake cleared his throat and spoke in his most professional voice. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth research vessel Wanderer. We acknowledge your impressive entrance. However, before we discuss terms of surrender, might we suggest turning down the volume on your threat delivery system? Our equipment is quite sensitive." The silence that followed was so profound that Jake wondered if their transmission had been received. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a new voice came through their speakers. This one was unenhanced, revealing what sounded like genuine confusion. "Captain Morrison, this is Commander Vex Thul of the Imperial Dreadnought Dominion's Edge. Your response is unexpected. Our intimidation protocols have proven effective across 47 conquered systems. Explain your species' inappropriate reaction to our superior might." Tommy was biting his knuckle to keep from laughing out loud. Betty had turned away from her console entirely, shoulders shaking with suppressed mirth. The entire bridge crew was fighting a losing battle against an epidemic of giggles that seemed to spread with each passing moment. Jake realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in human history. Humanity's first contact with aliens, and they couldn't stop laughing. Commander Vex Thul stood rigid on the bridge of the Dominion's Edge, his forearms crossed behind his back in the traditional pose of imperial authority. His scaled hide reflected the harsh lighting of the command center, and his vertical pupils dilated with confusion as he stared at the tactical display showing the tiny human vessel. "Sub-Commander Crixtal," he barked to his second-in-command, "review the intimidation protocols. Have we made an error in our transmission?" Crixtal's mandibles clicked nervously as she consulted her datapad. "No, sir. All parameters were executed perfectly. Voice amplification at maximum dramatic effect, pause timing calculated for optimal psychological impact, and threat delivery match the standard that has broken the will of 47 species. Then explain why the humans are exhibiting signs of amusement," Vex Thul hissed, the word tasting foreign on his forked tongue. On the Wanderer, Captain Jake Morrison was trying his best to maintain diplomatic composure while his crew struggled with their composure behind him. Dr. Priya Nakamura had moved to the communication station, her scientific curiosity overriding the absurdity of the situation. "Commander Vex Thul," Jake began carefully, "I believe we may have a cultural misunderstanding here. My species has been imagining scenarios like this for centuries through our entertainment media. Your approach feels very familiar to us." "Familiar?" Vex Thul's voice carried a dangerous edge. "The might of the Zephyrian Empire is not some primitive entertainment. We have crushed civilizations that spanned multiple star systems." Tommy Rodriguez leaned over to Betty Walsh and whispered, "He's really committed to the whole evil overlord thing, isn't he?" Betty had to cover her mouth to muffle her snort of laughter. Dr. Nakamura stepped forward. "Commander, if I may, I'm Dr. Priya Nakamura, xenobiologist. Perhaps I could help bridge this cultural gap. Would you be interested in understanding why humans respond to intimidation differently than other species?" There was a long pause before Vex Thul replied. "Proceed, human scientist." "Thank you. Humans have evolved a unique defense mechanism, called humor. When faced with overwhelming threat or stress, we often respond with laughter. It's not disrespect, it's actually how we cope with fear and build social bonds during crisis." "You laugh at death?" Crixtal's voice came through the channel, barely concealing her bewilderment. "Sometimes, yes," Priya replied patiently. "We call it gallows humor. The more dramatic or over-the-top a threat appears, especially when it matches our fictional portrayals, the more likely we are to find it amusing rather than terrifying." Marcus Kim, emboldened by the ongoing conversation, chimed in. "It's like when someone tries really hard to be scary but ends up being funny instead. No offense to your protocols, Commander." The bridge of the Dominion's Edge erupted in confused chittering as the Zephyrian officers tried to process this information. Their language had no equivalent for concepts like sarcasm, irony, or comedic timing. "Sir," reported the ship's cultural analyst. Our databases contain over 3 million hours of human transmissions. Perhaps we should review their entertainment protocols to understand this humor response. Vexthul's eyes narrowed. Display the human entertainment data. What followed was a crash course in human comedy that left the Zephyrian command staff in complete bewilderment. Clips from classic alien invasion movies played across their screens, showing dramatic speeches, over-the-top villains, and pompous declarations of conquest. The parallels to their own intimidation protocols were impossible to ignore. They have created fictional scenarios identical to our conquest procedures, Krixtal observed, her voice small with confusion. And they find these scenarios amusing? Vexthul asked. Back on the Wanderer, Jake could hear the aliens' confused discussions in the background of their open channel. Commander, if it helps, we're not laughing at you personally. It's just that your intimidation speech hit every single trope from our science fiction entertainment. Evil alien empire, dramatic voice effects, countdown timer, threats of integration. It's like you followed a script from our movies. Tommy couldn't help himself. Did you guys also study our villain monologue database, because that was textbook bad guy speech number 1? Villain monologue? Vexthul's voice cracked slightly. Betty Walsh turned around from her engineering station. You know, the part where the bad guy explains his evil plan in great detail instead of just getting on with it. Classic mistake in every action movie. The Zephyrian bridge fell silent. Their advanced artificial intelligence systems were running rapid analyses of human entertainment media, cross-referencing their own standard procedures with what humans labeled as cliched villain behavior. The results were deeply disturbing to their military pride. Sub-Commander, Vexthul said quietly, Are we the villains in human entertainment? It would appear so, sir. Their fictional evil aliens follow protocols remarkably similar to our own. Dr. Nakamura, sensing the shift in mood, spoke gently. Commander, understanding different cultures is complex. What seems terrifying to one species might seem familiar or even comical to another. It doesn't diminish your achievements or your empire's power. It just means humans are wired differently. Wired differently, Vexthul repeated. Slowly. Your species finds our greatest strength amusing. Not your strength, Jake interjected. Your presentation. There's a difference. We can see you have incredible technology and military power. It's just the dramatic delivery that feels familiar to us. Tommy, unable to resist, added, Maybe try a more casual approach next time. Less echo effects, more conversation. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake wondered if they had accidentally started an interstellar diplomatic incident. Then, impossibly, a sound came through their speakers that none of them had expected to hear from an alien throat. It was brief, barely audible, but unmistakably similar to human laughter. Did he just? Marcus whispered. I think Commander Vexthul just chuckled, Priya confirmed, barely containing her own amazement. The first crack in the Zephyrian Empire's perfect intimidation facade had appeared, and it came from their own commander discovering the absurdity of threatening people who found threats entertaining. The sound that had escaped Commander Vexthul's throat sent ripples of confusion throughout the Dominion's edge. In 3,000 years of Zephyrian military history, no commanding officer had ever made such a noise during a conquest operation. The bridge crew exchanged bewildered glances, their scaled faces showing expressions that had no names in their language. Sir, Sub-Commander Krixtal whispered urgently, are you experiencing a respiratory malfunction? Vexthul's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession. He had no idea what had just happened to him. The sound had emerged involuntarily when the human called Tommy had suggested they try a more casual approach to intimidation. Something about the absurdity of that concept had triggered an unfamiliar neural response. I am functioning normally, Vexthul replied, though uncertainty colored his voice for the first time in decades of military service. On the Wanderer, the human crew had heard the alien commander's brief chuckle, and the implications were staggering. Captain Jake Morrison leaned forward in his chair, sensing an opportunity to deepen this unexpected connection. Commander Vexthal, was that laughter we just heard? Jake asked gently. Negative, Vexthal responded quickly, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. Zephyrians do not engage in laughter. But you just did, Tommy pointed, out with a grin. And it sounded pretty natural to me. Across the Zephyrian fleet, something unprecedented was happening. The human transmissions were being monitored by communications officers on every ship, and the conversation between their commander and the humans was spreading through unofficial channels. Crew members who had never heard the concept of humor were suddenly exposed to the most contagious human trait. On the heavy cruiser Stellar Wrath, communications officer Zixara was analyzing the human entertainment database when she encountered her first Earth comedy routine. The video showed a human comedian discussing the absurdity of alien invasion movies, particularly the part where aliens travel millions of light years just to make dramatic speeches instead of getting straight to the point. That is oddly logical, Zixara muttered to herself, then quickly looked around to make sure no one had heard her agree with human reasoning. Meanwhile, on the destroyer Iron Dominion, Tactical Officer Mortex was reviewing footage of human reactions to monster movies. He watched as humans screamed, then laughed, then screamed again, all while obviously enjoying themselves. The concept of finding terror entertaining was so foreign to Zephyrian psychology that it broke something loose in his rigidly structured mind. They pay currency to experience fear, he reported to his captain in amazement. Then they discuss it afterward as if it were pleasurable. Back on the flagship, Dr. Nakamura was patiently explaining the concept of comedy to increasingly fascinated alien officers. Humor often comes from the unexpected, the incongruous, or the exaggerated. When something is so over the top that it becomes unbelievable, humans often respond with laughter instead of the intended emotion. Over the top, Vexthal repeated slowly, testing the unfamiliar phrase. Are you suggesting our intimidation protocols are excessive? Betty Walsh couldn't resist jumping in. Commander, you literally said resistance is laughably inadequate. That's not intimidating, that's practically inviting us to laugh at you. Another sound escaped Vexthal's throat, longer this time and unmistakably similar to human laughter. This time several of his bridge officers made similar noises. The sound rippled across the command center like a contagious yawn. Sir? Krikstal said urgently. The crew is exhibiting unusual vocalizations. Should we initiate medical protocols? No, Vexthal said, surprising himself with his answer. I believe we are experiencing the human phenomenon called humor, and it appears to be not unpleasant. The admission sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian chain of command. Officers who had spent their entire lives following rigid protocols were suddenly questioning why they took themselves so seriously. The concept of finding joy in absurdity was revolutionary to a species that had built an empire on stern intimidation and unwavering discipline. On the communications channel, Marcus Kim had been monitoring transmissions across the alien fleet. Captain, I'm picking up chatter from multiple ships. It sounds like they're sharing jokes. Jokes? Jake asked incredulously. Well, their version of jokes. Mostly observations about how seriously they take everything. One of them just commented that their morning formation drills are unnecessarily dramatic for the purpose of standing in straight lines. Tommy burst out laughing. They're developing a sense of humor about their own military precision. That's beautiful. The infection of laughter was spreading faster than the Zephyrian command structure could contain it. On ship after ship, crew members were discovering that their elaborate ceremonies, their pompous declarations, and their overly complex protocols were, when viewed through the lens of human humor, absolutely ridiculous. Commander, came a voice from one of the escort vessels. Our drill sergeant has been making the same speech about unwavering dedication to imperial glory for 15 years. Today, for the first time, we noticed that he actually says imperial glory 47 times in a 20-minute speech. That does seem excessive, Vexthal admitted, then caught himself. I mean, it demonstrates proper dedication to the Empire. Does it, though? asked another voice from a different ship. Or does it just waste time that could be spent on actual military preparation? Dr. Nakamura watched the readings on her xenobiology scanners with fascination. Captain, I'm detecting massive changes in the aliens' neurological patterns. It's as if their brains are rewiring themselves to process these new concepts. Is that dangerous? Jake asked with concern. On the contrary, it appears to be healthy. Their stress indicators are dropping significantly. Laughter releases endorphins and reduces cortisol levels in humans. It seems to have similar effects on Zephyrian physiology. Vexthul, who had been listening to this exchange, spoke with wonder in his voice. You mean this humor response actually improves biological function? Absolutely, Priya confirmed. Laughter boosts immune systems, reduces stress, improves cardiovascular health, and strengthens social bonds. It's one of humanity's greatest survival mechanisms. A survival mechanism, Vexthul mused. We have spent millennia perfecting ways to instill fear and submission. Your species has evolved to transform fear into joy. When possible, yes, Jake agreed. It doesn't always work, but when it does, it makes us stronger instead of weaker. The revelation hit the Zephyrian commander like a physical blow. His entire worldview, built on the premise that power came from inspiring fear, was crumbling. But instead of despair, he felt something else entirely. Something that might have been relief, or excitement, or hope. Sub-Commander Krikstal, he said quietly, cancel the invasion protocols. Sir? I said cancel them. We're not conquering Earth today. Instead, we're going to learn how to laugh. The Zephyrian High Command received the transmission from Commander Vexthul at precisely 1447 Imperial Standard Time. Grand Admiral Thexmore, Supreme Commander of the Conquest Division, was reviewing tactical reports when the message arrived, through official channels. What he heard made his four hearts skip a beat in unison. Invasion protocols canceled due to cultural contamination, Thexmore read aloud, his voice echoing through the war room aboard the massive command station. Eternal dominance. Request immediate deployment of xenopsychologists to study human humor phenomenon. Fleet morale compromised by infectious laughter syndrome. The 12 members of the High Command sat in stunned silence around the obsidian conference table. In 3 millennia of galactic conquest, no field commander had ever requested xenopsychologists during an invasion. The concept of infectious laughter syndrome didn't even exist in their military databases. Has Commander Vexthul suffered a mental breakdown? Asked Admiral Kethris, her scales darkening with concern. Negative, replied the fleet's chief medical officer, scanning his reports. Biometric readings from the Dominion's Edge show improved health markers across the entire crew. Stress hormones down 60%, neural activity increased by 40%, and social cohesion at unprecedented levels. Back on the flagship, Vexthul was experiencing the strangest day of his military career. His bridge crew, once a model of rigid discipline, had transformed into something unrecognizable. They were still performing their duties with exceptional competence, but now they did so while occasionally making observations that would have been considered insubordinate just hours earlier. Sir, reported Navigation Officer Zelkun, I've calculated our optimal formation pattern. Though I must note our current intimidating Arrowhead of Doom configuration is rather pretentious when you think about it. A simple line formation would be more fuel efficient and just as effective. The old Vexthul would have had Zelkun disciplined for questioning established protocols. The new Vexthul found himself nodding in agreement. You make an excellent point, Zelkun, efficiency over theatrics. Thank you, sir. Though I do admit the Arrowhead of Doom does look rather impressive. It does, doesn't it? Vexthul agreed, and both officers made that strange new sound they were learning to identify as laughter. On the Wanderer, Captain Jake Morrison was witnessing the most unusual first contact scenario in human history. Instead of negotiations over surrender terms, they were conducting an impromptu course in comedy appreciation with a galactic invasion fleet. The key to understanding human humor, Dr. Nakamura explained to the dozens of alien voices now participating in their conversation, is recognizing that we often laugh at things that should be serious. It's a way of processing difficult emotions and building connections with others. But why do you find our military precision amusing? Asked a voice from one of the escort ships. We have trained for centuries to achieve perfect synchronization. Tommy Rodriguez leaned into the microphone. It's not the precision that's funny, it's the unnecessary drama. Like you guys literally have a formation called Intimidating Arrowhead of Doom. That's not scary, that's hilarious. A chorus of chittering sounds came through the speakers, which Jake was beginning to recognize as alien laughter. The concept that their carefully chosen names might be inadvertently comedic was spreading through the fleet like wildfire. Our battle formations do have rather dramatic names, admitted another voice. The crushing fist of inevitable victory formation might be somewhat excessive for a simple patrol pattern. And don't get me started on overwhelming sphere of absolute destruction, added yet another officer. We use that formation for cargo inspections. The laughter that erupted from multiple ships simultaneously was unlike anything the humans had ever heard. It was as if an entire civilization was discovering joy for the first time. But not everyone in the Zephyrian hierarchy was amused. Grand Admiral Thexmore had assembled his crisis response team and was preparing emergency countermeasures. Deploy the Psychological Warfare Division, he ordered. Commander Vexthul and his fleet have been compromised by some form of human mental manipulation. We must quarantine the affected vessels before this contamination spreads further. Sir, interrupted his intelligence officer. Preliminary analysis suggests this isn't mind control. The affected crews are showing enhanced cognitive function and improved decision-making capabilities. Whatever the humans are doing, it appears to be beneficial. Beneficial? Thexmore's voice rose to dangerous levels. Our invasion force has been reduced to a collection of giggling fools. How is that beneficial? Well, sir, their tactical efficiency has actually improved by 23%. When crews aren't paralyzed by fear of making mistakes, they perform better. And their creative problem-solving abilities have increased dramatically. Meanwhile, Vexthul was discovering that humor wasn't just changing how his crew felt, it was changing how they thought. Problems that had seemed insurmountable under the old rigid command structure were being solved with innovative approaches that no one had dared suggest before. Commander, reported Engineering Chief Kartos, I've been reviewing our energy consumption patterns. We've been running our intimidation lighting arrays at full power for show purposes, wasting 30% of our reactor output. If we dial back the dramatic lighting, we could increase weapon power significantly. Excellent observation, Chief. Make the adjustments. Also, sir, our morning intimidation drills? They're actually counterproductive. The crew is so focused on looking menacing that they're not paying attention to tactical positioning. Permission to replace them with practical combat exercises? Granted. Anything else? Well, sir, our uniforms are incredibly impractical. All this ceremonial armor. Plating makes it difficult to perform maintenance tasks. Could we possibly consider more functional designs? Vexthul looked down at his own elaborate uniform, complete with dozens of purely decorative elements that served no purpose beyond looking impressive. For the first time in his career, he realized how ridiculous it was to prioritize appearance over function. Submit your recommendations for uniform redesign, Chief. Practicality over pageantry. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent transmission from High Command. Grand Admiral Thexmore's image appeared on the main screen, his expression thunderous. Commander Vexthul, you will immediately cease all interaction with the human vessel and prepare your fleet for quarantine procedures. Your crew has been compromised by alien psychological warfare. Vexthul looked at his bridge crew, who were watching the transmission with expressions of barely contained amusement. The Grand Admiral's over-the-top dramatic presentation, complete, with ominous background lighting and unnecessarily loud voice, suddenly seemed absurdly theatrical. Sir, Vexthul replied carefully, with respect, I believe you may be overreacting. My crew has never been more effective or more focused. We've made more tactical improvements in the last few hours than in the previous year. You dare question high command protocols? Thexmore roared. "I'm questioning the logic of protocols that prioritize intimidation over effectiveness," Vexthul replied, surprising himself with his boldness. "And frankly, sir, your current presentation style is exactly the kind of unnecessary drama that the humans find amusing." The silence that followed was deafening. Throughout the Zephyrian Empire, no one had ever suggested that High Command might be guilty of unnecessary drama. But as Vexthul's words spread through official channels, something unprecedented happened. Other commanders began to agree. The revolution began with a single chuckle from Commander Rathvel of the Border Patrol Fleet in the Andromeda sector. When Grand Admiral Thexmore's emergency broadcast reached every corner of the Zephyrian Empire, detailing the humor contamination and the need for immediate psychological quarantine, something unexpected happened. Instead of alarm, the broadcast triggered amusement. Did he just refer to laughter as a form of contamination? Rathvel asked his bridge crew, his mandibles clicking in what was becoming recognizable as alien mirth. That's like calling happiness a disease. Within hours, the story of Commander Vexthul's encounter with the humans had spread through unofficial channels across the entire empire. Crew members who had never questioned the wisdom of their dramatic protocols were suddenly seeing them through new eyes. The rigid ceremonies, the unnecessarily complex hierarchies, the over-the-top intimidation tactics that had seemed so impressive now appeared almost comically excessive. On the Wanderer, Captain Jake Morrison was receiving reports that defied belief. Their simple research vessel had somehow become the catalyst for what appeared to be a galaxy-wide cultural awakening. "Captain," Marcus Kim reported from his communications station, "I'm monitoring transmissions from across their empire. It's incredible. Ships are requesting permission to implement efficiency protocols instead of intimidation displays. Some commanders are actually asking their crews for suggestions on improving operations." Dr. Nakamura was analyzing the xenological data with growing amazement. "Jake, what we're witnessing is unprecedented. An entire civilization is undergoing rapid cultural evolution in real time. They're not just learning to laugh. They're learning to question, to innovate, to find joy in improvement rather than just in domination." Back in the High Command Center, Grand Admiral Thexmore was facing the greatest crisis in Zephyrian military history. His own staff was beginning to exhibit signs of the humor contamination, making observations that would have been unthinkable just days before. "Sir," ventured his tactical advisor, "perhaps we should consider that this human influence might not be entirely negative. Our field reports indicate significant improvements in fleet efficiency and crew morale." "Improvements?" Thexmore bellowed. "Our entire command structure is collapsing into chaos." "Actually, sir, it appears to be evolving into something more effective," the advisor replied, then paused. "And if I may say so, sir, that bellowing thing you do, it's not really as intimidating as you think. It mostly just hurts our ears." The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in his career, Thexmore was speechless. Around the conference table, other high command officers were nodding in agreement, their expressions showing a mixture of relief and barely suppressed amusement. You're all infected," Thexmore whispered. "Or liberated," suggested Admiral Kethris quietly. "When was the last time anyone in this room felt genuine joy in their work? When did we start taking ourselves so seriously that we forgot why we joined the military in the first place?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. One by one, the members of High Command began to examine their own motivations, their own protocols, their own assumptions about leadership and power. Meanwhile, Commander Vexthul was experiencing the most productive day of his military career. His crew, freed from the fear of making mistakes or questioning authority, had implemented dozens of improvements to ship operations. Their tactical efficiency had increased. Their problem-solving abilities had multiplied, and perhaps most importantly, they actually enjoyed coming to work. "Commander," Sub-Commander Krixtall reported, "I've been in contact with other fleet commanders. They're requesting permission to implement similar reforms, the humor protocols, as they're calling them." "And High Command's response?" "Mixed, sir. Some are resisting, but others are curious." Admiral Yex Cesara of the Exploration Division has requested a formal cultural exchange with the humans. She wants to learn what she calls the science of happiness. Vexthal looked at the main view screen, where the small human research vessel still floated peacefully in space. Such a tiny ship to have caused such enormous changes. "Open a channel." To Captain Morrison, he ordered. Jake's face appeared on the screen, his expression warm and friendly. Behind him, his crew was visible, going about their duties with the casual competence that had initially baffled the Zephyrians. "Commander, Vexthal," Jake greeted him. "I hope your crew is adjusting well to their new perspective." "Better than well, Captain. We are transformed. But I must ask, was this your intention? Did humanity plan to defeat our empire through laughter?" Jake's chuckle was genuine and infectious. "Commander, we didn't even know your empire existed until this morning. What you're experiencing isn't a human weapon or strategy. It's just who we are. We laugh because it makes life better, not because we want to conquer anyone." "But you have conquered us," Vexthal replied. "Not through force or intimidation, but through joy. Our entire civilization is questioning everything we thought we knew about power and purpose." Dr. Nakamura leaned into the conversation. "Commander, what you're describing isn't conquest. It's growth. Your people aren't becoming more human. They're becoming more themselves. Humor doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you could be." The words resonated through the Zephyrian fleet and beyond. Across the Empire, crews were discovering that efficiency didn't require grimness, that discipline didn't require fear, and that strength could coexist with joy. 3 weeks later, the Zephyrian Empire announced the most radical policy change in its history. The intimidation protocols were officially retired, replaced by what they called the cooperation initiatives. Instead of conquering species, they would invite them to join a galactic community, based on mutual benefit rather than submission. The humans of Earth, still processing the reality of first contact, found themselves not as subjects of an alien empire, but as founding members of what would become known as the Galactic Humor Alliance. It was humanity's first joke that became an official interstellar organization. Captain Jake Morrison, promoted to admiral and appointed as Earth's first galactic liaison, often reflected on that day when a simple research mission had accidentally changed the course of galactic history. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to teach it how to laugh. And in the end, that was perhaps humanity's greatest contribution to the cosmos. Not technology or weapons, or even wisdom, but the simple recognition that life was too short and too precious to take too seriously. The galaxy was a better place when it smiled. Commander Vexthal, now serving as the first director of interspecies cultural exchange, kept a human comedy collection in his ready room. His favorite was still the one about aliens who traveled across the galaxy, just to make dramatic speeches. Every time he watched it, he remembered the day his empire learned to laugh, and he was grateful that sometimes the best victories were the ones where everyone won. The Zephyrian Empire had set out to conquer humanity, and ended up conquering something far more valuable, their own capacity for joy. And in the end, that made all the difference in the galaxy.